So you're looking to get a project motorcycle for winter. Well, in this video I'm going to give you guys all the things to know, consider before buying a project bike. I've bought many project motorcycles, more than I probably should have, and I always get the question on what kind of things should I look for when I'm looking to buy my first project bike. Well, in today's video I'm going to give you guys all of the things that I personally look for when I go to look for a motorcycle. In many circumstances I always get the question in the comment section and I can't always explain everything to look for, and also in multiple instances I tell you guys the basic things to look for on a bike when I talk about a specific motorcycle to know things about. Well, this is the guide to the basic things to look for on a bike. There's a lot you have to consider, but the very first thing to consider before buying and to know is how much of a project are you willing to bite off and how much work are you really ready to do for a bike. Motorcycle projects will range between total restos and bikes that only need about 5 minutes of work, like my Triumph Bonneville. Now, just because we fired that Bonneville doesn't mean it's ready for the road, obviously, but in terms of the project, the bike's now running and it wasn't doing that before. A great way to get a deal, more in particular on vintage motorcycles, is to buy a bike that doesn't run. But there are so many things you need to look at on a bike that doesn't run in order to determine the condition and determine whether it's a bike you should walk away from or a bike that is a good and great buy. The very first thing you need to consider is the price of the bike. What does a clean example of the certain model you're looking at go for? How much work does your bike in particular need in order to become close to that example? If you're looking at a bike that needs a lot of work, but the owner is asking close to what a running, good condition bike would go for, it's not a bike that you should be looking to buy. Many people ask too much money for their bikes. There are many listings in which someone will put a motorcycle up for sale just to see what they can get for it, or perhaps they're living in the past from 2018 or even COVID time when motorcycles were on fire. The market is not where it was before, and you need to ensure you're not overpaying for a project bike. Now, after you've considered the price and perhaps you're going to negotiate with the person, you need to do your inspection before bringing the price even further down. Now, before even going to see the bike, I recommend you have a price in mind. I recommend you kind of initiate some sort of conversation on where you would like the price to be or how flexible the owner is. Sometimes it's hard to do that over text message, and if the bike isn't too far, it's in most cases worth going for. But if you are traveling 4 hours one way, it's definitely important that you don't get there and the guy says, "No, I want what I want," because then you just wasted 8 hours. When you're doing your inspection, here are the things to look for. Here are the things that I always check. The biggest thing is to bring your own battery with you, even if the owner says that the bike has a running functional battery. Now, I try to bring a battery when I'm going to buy bikes that aren't running. In many circumstances, I have bought bikes without even checking electrical systems. But you should bring a battery. You should hook it up to the bike. You should see if all the lights are working, the horn is working, the starter is working. If it has an electric starter, you should see if the indicators, the neutral light, the oil light, and any other functions the bike might have are working properly. Because if the bike doesn't work whatsoever, you might have some type of bigger fault. And of course, if the seller didn't disclose that none of the electrical system is working, that's something you gotta knock off the price. Perhaps if it's been sitting for a long time or neglected, maybe not all the functions will be working, maybe some fuses are blown, but the bike should do something. And if it's not doing anything, once again, that could just be a simple connection that is loose, but that's a risk you have to be willing to take, that it might need some wiring, or someone spliced the wiring, because I've had bikes I've bought and then I go and dig into them a little further and the wiring is all messed up. In order to avoid that, look at the wiring connections, look at the looms, see if they've ever been opened up or cut or wrapped in any sort of weird way. It's very hard to tell what's going on with the wiring, which is why you bring the battery to make sure everything is working. While doing this, if there's any aftermarket switches, aftermarket buttons on the bike, ensure to ask what those are, why the original switches aren't functioning properly, and why there's aftermarket bits on the bike. Now, the next thing to do is to check over the motor of the motorcycle. This is perhaps the biggest part of the inspection. Make sure the motor turns over. If you cannot handle a motor rebuild or you're not getting a great deal, if the motor is seized up, jammed up, yes, you can get the motor to turn over, you can get the bike to run again, but you're most likely going to have to take apart the top end, if not the complete motor, rebuild everything in order to get the bike really, truly up, running, operational, and a riding bike once again. It depends on the severity of the internals, and unless you're bringing a borescope to check all of those things, perhaps if you know ahead of time that the motor is locked up, bring a camera to stick it down into it, or if you're taking a complete gamble, ensure that you incorporate it in the price point that you might need to get a full rebuild kit or a new motor for the bike. Most of the time, if you're buying an old bike, they tend to be really solid. The motors, unless they're known for having common motor problems in specific models, you're probably going to be fine, even if it is locked up. It just is a lot of work to unseize an engine. In most circumstances, even if a bike has been sitting for around 10 years, the motor probably will not lock up. Now, if your motor isn't locked up, what most people are looking at when they're buying a bike is a motor that turns over freely. Kick the bike over. While you're kicking the bike over, listen for compression, listen to the sound of the engine. If there's any crunching noises, any cracking noises, any tapping noises that aren't regular, make sure to consider and mentally note all of those. Kick it over multiple times. Don't just kick it over once. Kick it over, get it through its full rotation cycle. If it's a 4-stroke, give it at least 4 strokes. This would also be a good opportunity since most vintage bikes are very easily accessible. You can pull the plug off, put a compression tester into it, and test compression on all of the motor's cylinders. If you can't tell by listening and feeling the kickstarter of the bike whether the compression is there or not, it's a good thing to bring a tester, especially if it's your first time. Now, at this point, there are a couple of different things you could do. You can try starting the bike, but I would highly encourage you don't do this. The reason for that is, if it is a simple issue and you accidentally start the bike, there goes all of your negotiation room that you could have had if the bike didn't start. Now, this scenario arose when I went to go buy my Triumph. The owner didn't know if the Triumph would run or not. The reason for that is because he simply couldn't kick the bike over. The bike had been sitting for many years. It ran when he parked it. He drained the fuel. He did everything properly, but he wasn't strong enough. He had knee surgery and he couldn't kick the bike over. When I got there, I was okay with buying a bike that didn't run, but he was asking significantly more money than what I was willing to pay for it. If the bike had started, I probably wouldn't have had the negotiation room that I did. Most of the time, if a bike has been sitting for a long time, it's usually the carburetors that are gummed up. You need to clean them out. You need to rebuild them in order to get the bike running properly again. If it's getting spark, has compression, you're probably having a fuel delivery problem. Like I said, I recommend you don't try to fire the bike, but at the same time, it would be nice to know if the bike runs before you buy it. And if you have the opportunity while you're sitting there to start the bike to see if it'll do something, I would refrain from taking the opportunity. But if you're someone who is okay with the price that you guys are negotiating at, and it's just a win for you if the bike fires, I understand if you go and you start the bike. It's different for every circumstance, of course. Now, if you're looking at a bike and it isn't running, you're kicking it over, it has fuel, it's getting fuel into the carburetor, and you don't know if it's a spark problem, whatever it is, because you're not sitting there dissecting it. You're doing an inspection based on whether you want to buy it or not. When you're inspecting a project bike, most of the time you're going to see if the motor turns over with compression, if the wiring is there, and the last and final piece, if the bike has all original parts or close to original parts. Now, I understand if you're not looking for an all original bike, perhaps you're looking to turn it into a cafe racer, and that's a whole different story. What are you looking for when buying this motorcycle? How big of a project are you willing to take, and where do you want to take the project? Do you want an all original bike? Do you want a nice running bike? Or do you want a totally custom one-off build? In all of those circumstances, I highly recommend you buy a bike that's as close to original as possible. And for those who are watching this video, I'm assuming you're not doing a 100% total custom build or a cafe build or something along that extent. And if you are looking to do that, I highly discourage it for your first project to go straight from not running bike to a fully custom bike. I highly recommend you go from not running semi-stock bike to a running stock bike, then customizing it. Now, at this point, you would do the research before buying a bike. You'd watch a video like mine, Things to know before buying an XS650 video, if you're looking to buy an XS650, because I go through all of the details, the things to look in specific for that bike in particular. But also, you get to see the bike, you get to see all the bits, all the pieces that are supposed to be there, and what things could be missing from your motorcycle. Another thing to note is manufacturers will have stampings. For Honda, it will say the part number starting with HM and then a number. You want to look for those part numbers and do an inspection and make sure everything's there as it's supposed to be there. In reality, that goes for super premium bikes, but it's something to note when you are buying a bike that's in nice condition, that isn't running, that all the parts are original or as close to original as you're willing to buy. You've inspected the wiring, you've seen what the bike does, you've seen what the engine does. Here are the rest of the things to go over and do a quick checklist of before negotiating your final price point. At this point is when you do a cosmetic condition report of the entire bike. Go top to bottom, see what's cracked, see what's faded, see what's chipped, see what's dented, and make mental notes of everything that is cosmetically wrong with the motorcycle. Now this next one is a big thing, but in most circumstances it's very rare for it to happen, but it happens. Check the frame. Look over the entire frame of the motorcycle and get underneath it and ensure that nothing is cracked. If the frame is showing any stress wear, that could be a major indication that you probably should walk away from the bike. Also, while you're underneath the bike, check the bottom of the engine for any miscellaneous cracking or things that are not looking right. You also want to inspect the wheels of a bike. It's very important that you go over the wheels. See if they're cracked, see if they're chipped, see if the spokes are broken, and check the tire age. Most of the time, if you're buying a bike that isn't running, it's always going to need tires. After 5 years, tires age out. It does not matter if they are brand new, tires will age out. You're gonna need to replace them, and that's another cost that should be in your negotiation tactic and driving the price down. Many times when you're buying a vintage bike that's been parked for several years and is a project, the tires are probably going to be cracking. Another very important thing to do is get on top of the bike, apply the brakes, check the brakes, and make sure they're not sticking. If you have a disc brake, chances are if it's been sitting for years on end, the disc in the front or the back, if you have that, will stick. Before you go and apply the brakes, row it through the gears. Make sure all of the gears are there. Make sure it goes into neutral. See if the clutch is working. The clutch isn't that big of a problem in most bikes, but the bigger problem is make sure all the gears are there. Another huge, major thing: the inside of the tank. The inside of the tank can also tell you the condition of the fuel that was last in the carburetors. If there's fuel left in the tank, well, you probably have a lot of rust to go with it. You can treat rust, you can fix it, you can line tanks, but also, if it's completely dry and it looks like it's not going to hold gasoline, it could have a hole somewhere in the tank. Now, if you're buying a bike that has a title, check the title on the bike. Check the engine number stampings, check the frame number stampings, and ensure the title matches one of the other. In most cases, unless you're buying a Triumph, the engine and frame number are not going to be the same. That doesn't mean they're not matching numbers, that just means that you have to run it through a registry in order to check for matching number certifications or not. While you're doing your inspection to see if there's an original exhaust, most of the time you can visually tell if it's original or not, but again, there will be stampings on the exhaust if you don't know. Check it for rust, check it for corrosion, check it for holes. Now, these inspections don't have to be in any particular order. The next thing I say is probably something you did when you hooked it up to the battery. But check underneath the battery tray for rust and corrosion. Check under the seat for loose terminals, loose wires, cut wires, or anything of the sort. Now, not every motorcycle will have a seat that flips up, but in many circumstances, motorcycles will have some sort of battery tray that is fairly easily accessible. Now, motorcycles also come with toolkits, owner's manuals, and things of the sort. Ask if they have them. In many circumstances, many people forget that they even have a toolkit if it's not attached into the bike, and forget they have the owner's manual sitting on their shelf. There are many circumstances in which I simply just ask the question, hey, do you have paperwork? Do you have the owner's manual? They go inside, they grab it, they're like, yeah, I have it, I completely forgot about it. And, well, it's a cool thing to add to the history of the bike. It's a cool thing to just have, and especially if they have a workshop manual, because those are very helpful. And if you're buying a bike without a title, in most circumstances, it's very rare that an older machine is stolen. It's very common for them to not have titles. Something I always love to do, and something you can do very easily before buying the bike, is ask for the VIN number and depending if you're in a state that runs engine numbers or not, you can ask for VIN and engine number, call your local police department, not 911. But the local number to the station, you can get in touch with the officer. They can simply look up the number. They can't tell you what bike it is. They can't tell you what year it is. They can't tell you any information on it. But what they can tell you, if it comes up on a stolen report or not. With all of those things being said, those are the important things to look over. Simple inspection, looking over every little detail, and just spending 5 minutes looking at the bike. Instead of talking with the owner, listening to his jibber jabber, listening to stories on how he used to have this bike or this bike, look at the machine, inspect it. Don't say anything, just look at the machine, look over it. If you stay silent, look at the bike, many circumstances the owners will start to speak. They'll start to say something, they'll start to bring up more issues the bike had than you even realized. And last but not least, don't believe anything that the owner says. Especially if they say that they changed the oil, especially if they say if they did this work or they did that work or they changed this part or they changed that part. Even if they have receipts, do your own due diligence, check over everything when you're there, and then after buying, doing your post inspection, double check everything they said that they did. With that being said, that's all I have for this video. Leave the things that you would add to an inspection, perhaps that I miss and perhaps that I don't do, that you do when you're looking to buy a bike. Or if you learned something in this video, click the subscribe button, leave a like on the video, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video.